So what is the spiritual state of today's workplace? In a word, it's poor. That's the bad news. The good news is it's improving. The spiritual state of today's workplace is poor but improving. When we look out over the next 10 years, there are tremendous spiritual opportunities in the workplace, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that today. First, though, we need to take a long, hard look at where we are right now. We need to look at ourselves in the mirror, and we need to confront some hard truth for a soft church. But let's take a look at it. Let's take a real good look at it. And to do that, we are going to walk into the work life of a guy that we'll call Marty Mainstream, or just Marty for short, all right? And we're going to walk into his life at the time he's 18. He's just getting ready for college. And we're going to follow him through about 45 years, the whole arc of time that he's in the workplace. And we're going to explore what his work life is really like in today's world. Now, Marty is just getting set to graduate. He has been admitted to the college of his choice. He's identified a pre-professional track he's excited about, and he's already starting to dream about the career that he's going to start someday. Marty grew up in a Christian household. In fact, his mom and dad are considered pillars in their local church. They tithe, they're active, visible volunteers on the weekends. But when it comes to faith in the workplace, they've been spiritually disengaged. They haven't applied faith at work. They haven't talked about faith at work. They haven't modeled faith at work. And as it turns out, the other people inside of Marty's church congregation haven't either. George Barna, a leading Christian researcher, did a comprehensive survey last year of churches all across the country. He spoke with pastors, he spoke to congregation members, and he came up with some really startling information. And we want to walk you through a few of these trends. They're not particularly fun, but they're real. Here's a question that he asked of pastors. He said, if you look at people inside your congregations, what percentage of them would you estimate to place faith, an active living faith, as the top priority in life? The pastors perceived that 70% of the people in their congregations would put faith at the top of the priority list. In reality, it was 15%. And the age group that was least likely to prioritize faith in life was young people under the age of 30. The challenge runs deeper, though, than just spiritual disengagement. You see, Marty grew up in a Christian community with a limited concept of spiritual growth. This is another area that Barna researched. He was speaking with pastors, and he said, what are the key factors, plural, factors, what are the key factors that make for spiritual transformation in life? 4 out of 5 pastors came back and quickly identified salvation or coming to Christ. Only 1 out of 5 identified spiritual maturity. And yet, it's in maturing that we learn to live out our faith in our lives, including the workplace. Not only that, as he was speaking and researching with the local pastors and asking them about their focus areas in ministry. For every 2 pastors who were focused outside the 4 walls of the local church, to engage the surrounding community, to engage the workplace, there were 5 pastors who were focused inside the 4 walls of the local church. And this was the kind of church that Marty grew up in. So when Marty heads off to college, the idea of faith at work is a totally foreign concept to him. It's not on his radar screen. But good grades are, so he works hard. And he graduates with honors, and he lands the job of his choice, which just happens to be in Cincinnati, Ohio. And so, on a chilly Monday morning in the fall, he walks through the door of his employer for the first time, and he encounters the brave new world of work, which is totally not what he thought it was going to be. Within days and weeks, he starts to feel disoriented. It's almost like the job is starting to consume him. His mom and dad call to check in because they want to know how he's doing. Just because he doesn't live at home doesn't mean they don't care about him anymore, right? So they say, how are you doing? And he says, I'm busy. And he is. In fact, Michael Zigarelli, a professor at Charleston Southern University, did a 5-year global study of Christians in the workplace. And he found that 6 out of 10 of us identify busyness as compromising our relationship with God. Not only that, it was pastors who were the most compromised group of all. 2 out of 3 pastors indicating that busyness was interfering with their walk with Christ. And so Marty's busy, but he's not spiritually centered. And the weeks and the months pass, and his behavior becomes almost indistinguishable from his non-Christian colleagues. You know, when he grew up in Sunday school, one of the things he learned was that as a Christian, he has an opportunity and a responsibility to share his faith. He learned about the Great Commission. But he doesn't even think about sharing his faith at work. And it turns out that other Christian businessmen don't either. CBMC, Connecting Businessmen to Christ, did a comprehensive survey of Christian businessmen across the country and found that only 1 out of 20, 5%, ever shares faith in the workplace even once. And so Marty continues to get busy. Now, there are some good things happening in Marty's life. For one thing, his social life. He meets a neat lady, he gets married, they have kids, they buy a house, so there's a lot of movement going on there. And he finds a local church in Cincinnati that he's excited about, and there are a lot of very cool things happening inside that local church. There are ministries he's getting involved in, and they're helping him. But those ministries are focused before 9 a.m. and after 5 p.m. Last year, At Work on Purpose did a survey of the thousands of local churches in greater Cincinnati. Currently, there are only 4 that have workplace ministries. And so the place where Marty is spending most of his waking hours at work and encountering so many spiritual challenges like, is this really my purpose? Is this what God's calling me to at work? Like, I'm being asked by my employer to do something and I'm struggling with the ethics of this, but I don't know what I should do. Where does he turn for answers? And so he struggles mostly through trial and error. That's mostly what the process looks like. And it's hard for him, but he'll make do. And he's discovering, oh, by the way, as his family's growing, that his financial requirements are growing too. All of a sudden, he's got a mortgage payment and he's got brace bills, and for the braces for 3 kids, it turns out. Not only that, he's got to start saving for college. And so he looks at that and he says, you know what? I need to work even harder. And so he does. And a couple decades pass, and he gets into his mid-40s, and he has a midlife crisis, just like his non-Christian colleagues. You see, he's received a whole bunch of raises and a whole bunch of promotions, and he's climbed the ladder of success, and he's looked out, and he doesn't like the view. He's accomplished a victory by the world's terms, but it's hollow for him. Deep in his heart, he has a yearning for spiritual significance, but all he's accomplished from a work standpoint is worldly success. But where does he turn for help? And who does he talk to? He hasn't heard about Bob Buford's book, Halftime. He hasn't heard about the idea that in midlife, we could step back and reassess our priorities in the workplace, that you could actually integrate faith and work and find a way to make the work that you do every day have a kingdom impact. But he hadn't heard about that. And so he struggles in quiet desperation. And he marks another couple decades because he knows that someday, as long as he can tread water and get by, someday he can retire and then he can do something spiritually significant for the kingdom. But he encounters a problem. Here's the problem. It's about 5 years before he's getting set to retire, and he and his wife sit down with their financial advisor. And they find out that they're not in a very good place to retire because they've spent a lot of time keeping up with the Joneses. And they're facing financial pressure. And in fact, their lifestyle hasn't been any different from the non-Christian. And we see these statistics. My friends, we are living these statistics right now. I mean, just consider a few of these. From the Wall Street Journal, household debt in this country has gone up 80% since 1990. The federal government has reported that there's been a negative savings rate in this country for 2 years in a row. The last time that happened was the Great Depression. And from Investment News, it turns out that of the 132 million Americans in our workforce, over half of us have no employer-sponsored pension or retirement program of any kind. And so Marty, as he's entering the twilight of his career, realizes that in retirement, he's going to need some extra cash flow. So when he walks out of the door of that employer in Cincinnati on that last day of work, he walks through the door of Walmart and he becomes a greeter. Now, let me just stop there for a second. That name, Marty, is made up, but Marty's a real person. I met Marty about a year ago, shortly before he retired, and he attended an At Work on Purpose event, and then he participated in a few activities. He signed up for our monthly newsletter. About 3 months after he started working as a greeter at Walmart, he sent me an email and said, Chuck, he said two things. First of all, he said, I want to encourage you that this ministry, this idea of workplace ministry is important. He said, it's really too late for me. We'll come back to that later. It's really too late for me, but I'm excited that people in generations to come could actually think intentionally about integrating faith and work. And he said, the second thing is, since I'm retired now, workplace ministry isn't relevant anymore for me personally. And so I'm emailing you to cancel my subscription to the newsletter. Let me tell you something. That email was a very hard email for me to receive. And I didn't answer it for several days because I was in prayer. I realized I had an opportunity to minister to him and to send a response that would be very thoughtful, but it needed to be very challenging. I wanted to be gentle, but I wanted to be very direct. The first thing that I wanted him to understand was that his ministry in the workplace didn't end just because he's a greeter at Walmart. As a matter of fact, that might be the most important ministry he has ever had. I suggested to him the possibility that somebody might walk through the door of that Walmart and he might shake their hand and change their destiny for eternity. That's right. That's right. Then I went on and I said, you know what? I want to challenge you on your concept of retirement. I said, I want you to look at Scripture. I said, I want you to read it and come back to me and show me one place in the Bible where it talks about or encourages any of us to retire from life. Now, we definitely expire from life, but we don't retire from life. So I wanted to challenge him on this, and then I went further and I said, and you know what? I said, Marty, you have an opportunity. You could be a person who comes forward and uses your story to affect hundreds or even thousands of people, to be able to talk about your story both as a warning and as an inspiration. Instead of thinking about receding into the twilight of your life, how about advancing into the spotlight of your future? Amen. That's what I suggested to him. Now, Marty replied after about a week. He sent me an email, and it just said this on it. He said, Chuck, thanks for sharing. And he signed off. And I haven't heard from Marty since. And that, my friends, is the spiritual state of today's workplace. That's the discouraging part. That's the bad news. But here's the good news. Improvement is absolutely on the horizon. There are major trends. God is moving. This isn't us. This is God moving and giving us the opportunity to be part of this. God is moving, and there are some very significant trends that are taking place. Here's number one. Christians are reawakening to the idea of living out faith at work. Here's just one statistic. Historically, there have been just a handful of book titles published every year in the field of workplace ministry. Last year, Thomas Nelson Publishing reported that over 300 titles were published in 2007. And the expectation is that that trend will continue to accelerate. There is absolutely a burgeoning interest in this area. That's the first trend. The second trend is that the emerging concept of workplace and workplace ministry is comprehensive. You know, in the simplest terms, what Marty failed to see was that workplace ministry is simply about taking vocational gifts and applying them for a kingdom impact. That's right. And it doesn't matter if you get a paycheck or not. All that matters is that you are making a difference as you're living out your work, making a spiritual difference as you're living out your work. But there are other ways to slice and dice or to organize this thing called the workplace. For example, Ed Silvoso, who's a leading figure in workplace ministry, talks very strategically about the idea of arteries, as he calls them, arteries in the workplace. 3 in particular: business, government, and education. And he talks about those as key arenas or venues where we can influence, we can truly shape the direction of the workplace, that we can bring a Christ-centeredness to it. And recently there's been a movement called the 7 Mountains. This is the idea that we can identify 7 areas of our culture that need to be conquered for Christ. So for example, we can talk about business in general terms, or maybe we look at a subset called arts and entertainment. You know, how much effect does what we watch have on how we live? And the answer is a lot, right? Now, I'm not interested today to talk about, well, what's the right way to slice and dice all this? That's not the point. The point is that this is not a piecemeal idea. Workplace ministry is a holistic idea, and we need to approach it that way. Now, here's the third thing, the third trend that's really exciting. Workplace ministry is truly positioned for a global impact. Have you thought about the velocity of ideas in today's world? Do you realize, can you imagine, what would it have been like for the Apostle Paul if he could have gone to Greater Cincinnati Airport, hopped in a plane, and gone anywhere in the world to do his church planning? Or to sit down at a computer, type up a letter, and then hit the send button and go out to millions of people in one heartbeat? We can do that today.